friends, welcome to another episode of P3M with Kailash Upadhyay. Today we are tackling a topic that's often discussed in very hushed tone, but it has a massive impact on the portfolio management. This topic is navigating organizational politics in portfolio management. And I have a guest with me, Kareem Streek. I know Kareem from last couple of years, and we had lot of discussion with each other. And I found that Kareem, his professional experience, and especially in the portfolio management and the organizational, cultural, and political aspect of the area of how it influenced the portfolio, have always I have learned from Kareem, and I always wanted to share this learning with the global audience. And I thought, why not I do a podcast on this particular topic? So why not I invite Kareem directly, and he's the right person who can share his rich experience around this topic. So Kareem, thank you for accepting my invitation to be here in this podcast.
Thank you, Kailash. I'm excited to be a part of this podcast, and I'm looking forward to the conversation and hopefully providing insight and guidance to others who may be facing similar situations and challenges in their career and within their organization. I think this is a great experience and a great platform for providing knowledge to the wider public. So, looking forward to this.
Thank you, Kareem. Seriously, more than my audience, I'm also want to very to learn about this topic, and how this learning can be taken back to my portfolio management, and deliver the successful portfolio results. Let's start with the first segment of this podcast, where we're going to talk about what is this organizational politics, and this is the elephant in the room. Let's begin with that, and where we will talk about how this many people think organization politics is always from a negative connotation, that they think that politics is negative, has negative influence on the portfolio and portfolio success. But I want to ask you, Kareem, do you also think that organization politics is always detrimental to portfolio management?
I don't think so. I think that organizational politics plays a beneficial role in terms of being able to guide the organization in terms of achieving its strategic outcomes. So the key difference in terms of a toxic political organizational environment versus a positive one deals with being able to manage the ethical part of it in terms of being able to align stakeholders, secure the necessary resources, strategic outcomes that you're looking for from the organizational perspective. So when you go into the quote unquote politics of it, it's really about understanding what are we trying to achieve in that organization, who are we trying to benefit, and who as a stakeholder has the level of influence and interest to achieve the outcome. I think it's a matter of basically just understanding who are the critical players within that whole landscape, how they interact, how best to ensure that they interact well, always keeping in mind what is the end goal in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So to that question, it doesn't have to be a negative connotation. It can be very well positive. It just matters on how you best manage and leverage the resources that you have in terms of your soft skills along with your technical skills to get everyone to be aligned with the overall objective of the organization.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kareem. Kareem, I want to also ask, would you mind also sharing what do we mean by organizational politics? I know that you rightly said organizational politics does not always can be looked from the negative perspective, negative connotation. If the global audience wants to know what are the different aspects of the organizational politics, Kareem, if you don't mind sharing your experience around that.
In terms of that, I would say it would be like it would be aligning stakeholders on the necessary resources. And like I said, they're driving the strategic outcomes. However, if it's left unchecked or misused, it can derail priorities and foster conflict. So understanding these dynamics is critical for portfolio manager to navigate and succeed.
Yeah, I think so. That's a great point. Again, And you rightly said, if the politics goes in the right hand, then it can be a tool for organizational success. And I also want to take an example, Kareem, here. In one of my early, when I was new to the organization, and when I didn't have any experience about the political environment, the power struggle, what I think organization politics all about, the power struggle between different functions or conflicting priorities, or maybe the different perspective about the initiative under the portfolio. And when I was new to the organization, I found that it's very difficult to survive in the organization. But when I was more familiar with the organizational politics, I also found a manager. I also found a manager who have rightly used this politics for the. He always protected his team. I was a part of a. I got a great manager in many organizations where I worked, and I saw that these managers have rightly used this organizational politics to protect their function, to protect their team, and the overall organizational. They never use the organizational politics for their own success, for their own benefit. So could you also give me some examples from your experience where you faced this kind of positive or negative political influence on your portfolio management?
In terms of that, I can go to a number of different situations in my previous work life where I've had the opportunity to basically lead some organizations, specific teams, both from a financial and non-financial perspective. And for me, what works well from the organizational politics standpoint is to get buy-in. To get buy-in, you need to have a level of authenticity that you show to your team, your immediate team, that they can trust you. And the only way that they can be able to trust you is if you allow them to understand who you are, you understand who they are, what's their motivations, what's driving them, and finding a way to link their own personal and professional motivations to that of the organization in terms of what you're trying to achieve as the portfolio manager. And portfolio manager can be used in different connotations, but from that perspective, it's really about understanding what is the objective of the organization, how best you can serve your team, because I think it really comes down to be a good leader, you have to be able to serve your team and not just dictate a mandate from them. And once you show that, and then it comes down to some very simple things in terms of just being there when they need you to represent them in terms of voicing concerns, or just when they're working late, just being there with them when they're working late on a particular task, even though you may not have to necessarily be there, but being part of that helps. And more importantly, when there are challenges or when there's something that needs to be pushed back to executive leadership, this is making the point that you voice and advocate for them in terms of, okay, this is what we need. This is what we can do with the available bandwidth and the available resources, and let executive leadership know that there has to be a give and take. And these are the consequences that needs to be considered in terms of whatever expectations that they may have, which may differ from the reality on the ground.
No, I think so. This is a very valid point. Give and take. I will if I want to elaborate from my own experience, Kareem, you rightly said in organizational politics, if you want to address that political issues or political culture and political influence on the portfolio, how the portfolio manager rightly said, how you as I said, give and take perspective, even at add-on skills. Maybe I don't know how my team, I have lot of team to report, and I don't know how they thinks, the political power. I'm using the power because maybe I may have lot of authority where sometimes some team also get some kind of bugged down with me. They think that I'm also using the political power kind of things and all. And this is the time when I realize that okay, let's not use the political power kind of things and all. And I talk to the team that there's some time maybe using sometime the power is also not a wrong thing to do if the situation demand in the portfolio management for any specific project kind of thing where we need to use the forcing power. Of course, we will use the, the collaboration, the confrontation. But if such certain time where things are really have aggressive schedule, have aggressive, financial constraints, then maybe sometime that power game where you need
Part of
to use.
title, the part of
Yeah,
your title alone can sometimes in situations warrant enough to have something be effective in terms of I outrank an individual, and therefore the perspective that I have may very well be at a broader, higher level than the individual who may be intervening or impeding the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kareem, this one aspect of, as I said, one aspect of this, this organizational politics is about conflicting priorities. There are different priorities that different function has. Okay, and in your portfolio, you need to, you rightly said, you need to take all these different, business function together for the better success of the portfolio. But each business function have their own priorities. They want to impose their priorities on the at any cost. They don't think the overall organization success, they think success of their portfolio or their function. And so how do we ensure that in such conflicting priorities we ensure the portfolio alignment in this kind of situation? Kareem, if you can share your experience around that as well.
I talked on it before. I think it's really a case of fostering transparency and inclusivity. So I think
Awesome.
when you have situations where you have power dynamics and you have conflicting interests and you have perception management at play in terms of being conflicts, I think the main thing is just, for me at least, is being able to be as transparent as possible depending on the situation, because there are certain times where you have to make sure that the information that you're providing, it does not go too far, but you still nonetheless have to be able to provide the necessary information for people to have enough context to understand where you're coming from and be able to understand where they fit in the overall objective of what you're trying to achieve. And I think it makes, I think I make a point in terms of giving voice to those individuals who may be influential just by their very nature in terms of their personality and whatnot, and then other individuals who may not be as forceful or loud or aggressive. I don't say necessarily aggressive. Being able to give those individuals who may always have a very valid point to make in the organizational context, but not because of their role, may not be able to voice that as appropriately, and being able to make sure that you're giving that level of balance in terms of who has ability to provide feedback, provide context, to provide that level of influence that they may otherwise may not be able to do in their typical role.
Yeah, I think so. That's really awesome. Kareem, it's very, very important that we understand that there will always be different business function who are involved in the portfolio. They will have their own priority. You rightly said being transparent and being putting the organizational vision into the center of, rather than individualistic approach. Let's not have individualistic approach. Let's have the organizational success and the portfolio aligned to the organization success. And each business function, you rightly said, communication with them transparently, sharing that what is good for the organization success, rather than individual, because the individual business function, correct me if I'm wrong, Kareem, individual business function will not be successful until the organization is not successful. Have you do you also think that way, or have you also come through another situation where business function are successful and organization are not successful? What do you think your
Yes.
thought around?
I've seen situations where you can have at a business function level where the business function may very well be operating at top performance, but the company may be underperforming. And that comes again because of one, having silos within the organization itself. And two, again, it goes back to what we talked about in terms of transparency and allowing for the freedom of communication within the organization as it relates to the overall objective. So in organizations that I've had impact or influence within, I've seen that situation play out where you have very high type A personalities where they have their own perspective on how things should be done, and they try to dominate how other business functions operate. And what you typically have to do, at least what I've seen, is that you have to be able to understand those individuals and their personality types and understand what resonates with them in terms of where their perspective is, why are they the way they are, leveraging all the different tools. Because again, like you said, I think one of the things you said is that sometimes you have to use the title of authority to mitigate certain situations. And then there's also situations where you have to use the what's in it for me and how can I benefit from it. and the symbiosis in terms of, okay, well, if I work with this particular individual on this particular project, it's going to have a beneficial on something within my specific business function, which I can leverage. So at the end of the day, I think it really just comes down to being able to understand people, understand what motivates people, and using those levers to leverage the resources, the limited resources within the organization, and making sure that from a value stream perspective, you're able to have all the different players within the different business functions to work in tandem to achieve a specific outcome. Because, like you rightly said at the beginning of this particular part, if we don't have business functions working in unison in terms of overall organization's objective, you're going to find yourself where the organization will falter in terms of its strategic goals, but the business function may find itself performing well. But then in terms of at the end of the year, did we as an organization achieve our overall goals? No. And that's probably most likely because we weren't able to collaborate and interact as well as we should have.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. We are on the same page. You rightly said, Kareem, the individualistic approach. If every business function think individually from their function, of course, sometimes the individual function may be successful, but the overall organization may have their own challenges, and it's not good for the overall organization in a long term basis, kind of things and all. Now, taking from here, and let's go deeper into this topic. Kareem, I want to ask you, have you come across any framework or any methodology, that you found effective in managing this political landscape, which you can, of course, we said transparency, of course, we said having a common vision, of course, we said, collaboration approach with the different business function will make the portfolio successful and navigate the political landscape, the influence of political landscape, organizational political landscape on portfolio. But any specific methodology which you have found useful, Kareem, which my audience can take it and apply it there directly, Kareem?
Sure. Well, I think one approach you will recommend is leveraging the organizational network analysis, or
Yeah.
ONA.
Yeah.
Helps to identify informal networks and influence structure within the organization. And by understanding those networks, the portfolio managers or those acting in the capacity of a portfolio manager can engage the key influencers who might not be in formal leadership positions but have substantial impact. So again, just because you may not be a direct individual, might not be a director, they may be someone who works under the director, but who has significant influence because of tenure or skill to influence other individuals within the organization. Using a framework like that helps in terms of identifying those individuals. Another one is the Hofstede's cultural dimension theory, which examines cultural differences across regions. So, for example, understanding the political distance in different cultures shape how you engage with stakeholders. In a high distance culture, deference to senior leaders is key, whereas our distant cultures may require collaborative approaches. And in terms of those situations, just to give context in those situations, I've used that in one organization where for a conglomerate where it had business interests throughout the Caribbean. And you can see, even though the Caribbean is considered to be more or less considered to be the same, there are very different cultural dynamics within the Caribbean. And using frameworks and methodology like that helped me to understand how best to tackle specific assignments, portfolio assignments, in one country versus another country. Because again, you going in, if you go in with the mindset that they're going to be, everyone is all the same. No, there's subtle nuances that you're going to have to keep in mind and be very cognizant of, because you may very well find yourself either overplaying or putting yourself in a situation where you alienate yourself from key stakeholders who can help you or help you to fail in some instances.
Yeah, I think so. I think these two methodology which you shared, the ONA, organizational network analysis, and the Hofstede's cultural dimension, and these are the great methodology. I think so, Kareem. I can directly take it from you and try to see how I can apply these into my portfolio in my organization. And you rightly said organizational network analysis helps us understand the different informal network, not just a formal network. formal hierarchy, reporting, but the informal influence, the and so on. So this is a great way to understand, the power struggle, which is nothing but the organizational political aspect is the power struggle. We can know who has the power, who has the authority by understanding the organizational network analysis. And the second methodology framework, which you said is even better. Actually, you rightly said that as per the Hofstede's cultural dimension, that there are high power distance culture, and there's a low power distance culture. And you rightly said in a high power distance culture where probably you need to satisfy somebody's ego to maybe take their authority and do maybe formal reporting to them. Whereas in low power distance culture where
You can be more familiar. You can be more familiar as opposed to being more professional and more. I want to say a little bit more standoffish. Or in that instance, I've seen that situation play out where it works well to be more familiar with the individual because of that's just the culture. And like you were rightly saying, depending on the circumstance, you may very well have to be more formal, more by the books in terms of how you communicate with the individuals, just to make sure that you're respecting their boundaries, respecting their cultural preferences and beliefs and what's not.
Yeah, I think that's really, really great framework. And what I learned from you is in a low power distance culture where people can be more freely with each other, where people can be more collaborative with each other. They don't need to have some hierarchical or maybe there is maybe that the reporting or the performance. They're not kind of a top down. Rather, it's a more flat or in a low distance. Or it's more flat way of collaboration can be easy, portfolio management can be easy, and I think that's a great way. Taking from both of these things, can we club both of these theory together, the organizational network analysis and this another model of power distance kind of things, Kareem? Can we use them together like that way?
I think it's context matters. I believe
Yeah.
context matters. So I think it's just a case of you apply it where you need to apply it with the individuals that you know you need to apply it with. So again, I think you touched on it in terms of I've worked at an organization that was a conglomerate had business interests across the Caribbean, in North America, and Latin America. Needless to say, within that whole demographic and that regional and international landscape, you have to know when and where to apply which framework and why, and understand the nuances of that and the drawbacks of that as well too. So I think it's a case of having that in your tools and knowing, okay, well, I have this in my toolbox. When do I apply this? Do I have the criteria that makes this and execute? So
Yeah, I think so. I agree with you, Kareem. The context matter. In fact, in discipline agile, also we say the context matter. Even in business analysis framework, I have learned the context is a very important core competency of business analysis. And as a portfolio manager, when you are a business leader, based on the organizational context within the portfolio, you can club one or two methodology to have a better, result for your portfolio success and to navigate the organizational political dimension and so on. So sorry. I think, Kareem, that's a great discussion I'm having, and let's go a little further from here. And I want to ask now this: you have worked in multinational environment where you have different layer of complexity where maybe let's say there's some part of the organization operate from low, from some countries like Asia Pacific countries. Some business function may work from maybe Europe and the Americas, or maybe other, maybe the Australian region and all. In this multi environmental or multinational environment landscape, what are the practical tips can you share for navigating the political landscape?
first thing will be cultural sensitivity. So I think the first thing if cultural sensitivity means in just really understanding the communication styles that's preferential within the region that you're operating with. Once you have a strong understanding for that, I think that will help to navigate and provide a solid framework in terms of how you go about succeeding in as a portfolio manager in terms of getting what you want as your outcome when you know within what parameters to operate. I think the next thing will be data-driven discussions. There are some in some organizations, some cultures where they're more have a conversation as opposed to show me the data. And I think that's one of those things where you need to understand, okay, well, depending on the organization, depending on the region, depending on a lot of the different aspects that fall into play, the best thing to do is what I'm seeing, basically having the data speak for itself, but not just having the data speak for itself, but having a story behind the data and being able to show that as easily as possible through visualization. So visual dashboards are usually the preferential go-to for situations like that, because what it does is you basically set up the narrative in terms of what are you trying to communicate, and not only what are you trying to communicate, but what action are you looking for stakeholders to take based off of the information that you're providing them with. Next thing I would think about would be building alliances. So from the building alliance standpoint is really about understanding who are the people who could really help you achieve what you're trying to achieve for your perspective. And that goes not necessarily just in terms of the city sponsor, but in terms of all different key individuals within the organization, whether internally or externally, who can help you to achieve what you're trying to achieve for the organization itself, and making sure that you're having those nuanced and leveraged conversations and interactions with everyone as needed to make sure that what you're trying to achieve as the outcome is achieved. I think one other thing I will probably think about is having like leverage cultural ambassadors. And from that standpoint, what I'm more so thinking in terms of having someone within the region, if you're not familiar with the region that you're in, to have that person to be the one who can guide you in terms of how to navigate the different intricacies within the region, within the organization that plays in that region. Having individuals like that helps you to avoid some of the missteps and the faux pas that you would otherwise make if you were just doing it on your own. And they can also, through that, help you to build alliances. So I think there's a two-step benefit in terms of having cultural ambassadors to navigate the intricacies of the region in terms of the cultural perspective, but also helping you in terms of being able to build greater and stronger alliances.
I think, Kareem, there's a lot of things to take it from this discussion. You rightly said cultural ambassador. I have never thought from this perspective that when you work in a multinational organization, and where you can have, when you want in specific, specific, let's say Asia function, you add a, cultural ambassador. Maybe he may be your point of, where he can guide you about the different cultural changes and how the power dynamics aspect of the organizational culture. So this cultural ambassador is, I think, so completely new perspective which I have taken from this particular session. And one more important thing which I really personally like this, and which I have is resonate very well with me, because Kareem, you said data driven decision in terms when organization politics having too much influence on any portfolio success. Because Kareem, let me share my own experiences and thought. Many time I can be completely wrong, Kareem, but this is just, as I said, is my own experience, and I'm not saying that I'm always right, or I may be most of the time I may be wrong. But when I worked in different organization, I worked with some French organization, I worked with, of course, India, and I worked with some US organization. And when I found that it's not just in any one particular region, but what I thought, people don't take decision based on any data. So their decision is not based on the data. Their decision is based on purely some, again, it's kind of an organizational politics comes
Intuition, some
in
level of intuition from
influence,
years of experience. Yeah, yeah.
some favoritism to some culture or some individual or some one or two aspect of that particular that group or that particular stakeholder. But here you rightly made the point that and that is why I feel that organization politics creates big problem for success, because the data is the decisions are not based on data but based on the non-essential things what we said, based on somebody's influence. You rightly said, if somebody have influenced you because of his, maybe because of his language, because of his color, because of his or any other dimension, any other element, any other, this is what I have seen it happening, frankly saying. And I have always seen this is the have led the portfolio failure. And so this point you rightly gave a perspective that, the decisions should be only based on the data. When the decisions are based on the data, then we will not have this political struggle, and we will not even think that there is some, such organizational politics coming, because I think this aspect, without database decision, it always comes into the organizational bad politics. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kareem.
I mean, you're correct. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it really comes down to some individuals may have their own personal belief in terms of how they think something's going to work, and they just go off a gut feeling or intuition or what's not. But a lot of times, to contain or control that influence, especially if that individual is at a very high level, you need to be able to show them, well, this is the data. Does it or does it not support the assumption? If it doesn't support the assumption, then you're going to have to make other considerations in terms of where do we go next. Is this a go or no go situation, or do we need to get more data to make sure that we know what we're really getting ourselves into? And I think what that does is effectively remove the personal nature of it, and this makes it a lot more objective and not. It helps to keep it more objective, and it, if done effectively, to lessen the personal belief that you're attacking the individual and what they're looking to achieve, and just keeping it strictly to the data.
Yeah, I think so. That's really great. And I think, Kareem, you also said something about building alliances. I think this is another cross-functional relationship. This alliances is still, I feel, not navigated to the fullest, where again, I'll take it the same old point that, individualistic approach are there into many portfolio, where every business function is keeping their business function success as a priority, rather than, so there is no alliances, there is no synergy. That's another very valid point you said. If as a portfolio manager we need to build alliances between this business function, we need to ensure that this business function work toward this portfolio success rather than individual business function success, because the portfolio management is performed in a broader environment than the portfolio itself. It is influenced by, and in a portfolio there are so many organizations can influence: the customer organization, the supplier organization, the funding organization, the regulatory organization, and the performing organization. Of course, there are so many organizations. When you're doing a portfolio management, you cannot just think from the performing organization where you work. You need to also create alliances between your supplier. Am I correct to say that, Kareem, in that way?
Yes, you're correct. In terms of, I worked as a business unit manager in the past, and in that role and that capacity, what you're outlining is pretty much what it is in a day to day, in terms of you need to be able to make sure that you're having you having and maintaining the relationships with your suppliers, your vendors. You're making sure you're having and maintaining relationships with government officials to make sure that whatever projects that you have going on can continue and be not impeded by any unnecessary bureaucracy. Making sure that you're working with partners in other countries to make sure that they're doing the necessary work on your behalf. So it really just comes down to, again, I think it's a case of, as a leader, as a portfolio manager, being able to understand who are the people that you're working with, understanding their motivations and understanding how you can leverage their motivations to get your specific outcomes the way you want them to. So I think it's just understanding, again, what are the interdependencies between suppliers and the company, the government organizations and the company. How do you just keep all of those different things in tandem and making sure that they're all aligned? Especially if it's a case where you have to make sure that from a finance perspective, the finance department is well aware of what you're trying to do with the vendors and well aware of what you're trying to do with making any obligations with government officials. So building alliances and building strong alliances where people know that they can rely on you, and more importantly, that they know what you stand for in terms of your professional standard. That's important.
I think so. That's really, really great point. All of these different aspects you shared, Kareem, to navigate the organizational political influence on the portfolio, whether it's cultural sensitivity, whether it's a data-driven decision, whether it's building alliances, and you shared your personal experience involving a cultural ambassador, where that ambassador will give you the right perspective about the culture and the political aspect of the organization, and then you can easily navigate. So these are the I think so. Great point, Kareem. I think so. If this P3M community, the portfolio management community, can leverage these insight from you, I think so. They can surely make the portfolio toward the successful outcome kind of things and all. So in my next segment, I want to talk about some ethical consideration in organizational politics, how ethical aspect. And so what I want to tell you, Kareem, isn't this politics is a double-edged sword, where, sometimes the politics is, you rightly at the opening session, you rightly said politics is not always wrong. Okay. But we also know that politics has the negative connotation as well. So I think it's a double-edged sword, and how portfolio manager ensure they navigate it ethically, that's very, very, because when it comes to politics, people sometimes become unethical, and they try to use this politics for their own benefit kind of things. And also, how do we address this, where the in an ethical way, how can we ensure that the politics doesn't have negative influence, and we can exploit the positive aspect of organizational politics for organizational and overall portfolio success, Kareem?
In the previous life as an auditor, ethics is paramount to practically everything I've done in terms of my career. So I think and we talked on it at the very beginning. I think the main thing is about transparency and fairness. Being transparent in terms of what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, transparent in terms of how you communicate, fairness in terms of making sure that you're involving all the necessary and relevant stakeholders and keeping them duly informed. When you take the context of transparency and fairness, I think you have to look at it from the standpoint of what are the organizational values and objectives, and always keep it anchored in terms of what are the organizational values and objectives. And in your terms of your communications, in terms of your work, are you being transparent and fair as it relates to those organizational objectives and values? And if you find yourself not being objective, or aligning with the values of the organization itself, then I think that's where you need to take a moment to ask yourself why, what's going wrong, and then make the necessary adjustments. So that aside, you have bodies like the PMI Code of Ethics, which provides a strong foundation in terms of ethical framework from which to work and operate from. If you don't necessarily have an organization that has a value system which is very strong to work with or to operate from. And I think at the end of the day, it really just comes down to knowing yourself as a professional and what you want to represent as your personal brand. Those are the things you need to keep in consideration in terms of how do you navigate that overall ethical political landscape, but then also making sure that you're using PMI as an example in this particular context, the Code of Ethics, to help you know how to navigate the overall portfolio working environment that you're in. And for example, I think one of the things that you probably should be able to do is to avoid situations where you're having favoritism and resource allocation. When you're in organizations, there may very well be situations where you may have very good a rapport with individuals who may try to leverage that to their own benefit. And you need to be able to be as independent in your approach to the allocation of resources and making sure that that is transparent and why you're being fair in that approach. Making sure that whatever you do in terms of your thought process, your actions is well documented so that anyone, for whatever reason, if you were no longer organization, can come behind you and basically just see, okay, well, this is the way the individual as a portfolio manager came about their decision making, came about their action steps, and they can make an assessment in terms of, okay, well, this was fair, this was transparent in terms of everything that they did. They may not necessarily agree, but the objective is that you were being transparent and as objective as you can be with the context that you're operating within.
I think so. Yeah, Kareem. You rightly said PMI ethics and professional conduct. That guidelines is, I have read it multiple times, and I often talk about, even in my training session, that as a portfolio manager, when you navigating the organizational politics, so you always need to keep these ethics into consideration.
Personally,
You cannot you cannot just just to protect the portfolio value delivery, just to make the portfolio successful. You can't use your power, organizational, the politics means your power or maybe your own priority. You can't keep them into priority. Rather, even when the portfolio is not going well, you need to keep the ethics intact. You need to behave. You need to have a professional conduct kind of things and all. And that's very very important, Kareem. We need to consider this very seriously. And I want to share, again, some of my experiences here, Kareem, about the ethical things. And I think so. It's not uncommon for anybody. We all may have experienced this thing many times. Because of these senior leaders, senior executive, I have been part of one organization, Kareem, where I want to tell you that the senior executive was leveraging their influence, their power for their personal success, not for the portfolio success and ultimately for the organizational success. And things doesn't things doesn't hide for too long. And when the investor, when the funding organization were known about this kind of unethical thing, and the whole organization was impacted. I have personally had to quit my job because I have been directly working with somebody at this executive. And personally, people also had a wrong impression sometime, Kareem, about myself at that point of time. So what I want to tell you, and I realized at that point of time, that if people use this power, people use this politics for their own benefit. And the ethics are always kept behind. And what you rightly said, we need to be very transparent, very fair in our organizational behavior. And no matter what happens in organization, no matter even things doesn't go well in the portfolio, but we need to navigate the complexity in the portfolio in most ethical manner. We can't just impose some unnecessary conditions or on our partners, our suppliers, or maybe our funding organization, and can't represent the wrong data, because that's all we have seen happening, Kareem. Isn't that maybe you may have also come across experience, or you may have heard of this kind of
I've experienced something similar to that in terms of where individuals may have used and their position of influence to push particular projects which had benefit to their own personal brand, but in terms of the ROI on the project itself, it was not where it really panned out to be. So it was given a lot of great hype and hope, and the reality was very far from the reality of what it was supposed to deliver. But the individual never really was around to see that fallout. But by that time, they had already leveraged the prospects of what it was supposed to deliver to put themselves into a better position elsewhere. So that's one of those things where, from an ethical standpoint, you have to be able to challenge individuals in terms of, okay, well, is this business case really beneficial to the organization or not? And to the portfolio, overall, how does it really benefit the organization in terms of what it's trying to achieve in terms of its strategic goals and objectives? And sometimes you may very well have to have very uncomfortable conversations with individuals and those within the organization in terms of, okay, are we doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason?
Yeah, I think so. So, Kareem, I think so. These are the great discussion I had with you in this podcast episode. And I think so. We discussed different aspects of organizational politics. What is organizational politics? Whether politics is always a negative connotation, or it also has positive aspect for portfolio success. We spoke about different, the theories and framework which you have shared, and especially the cultural ambassador, data-driven decision, and a lot of things have been discussed in this session. And I think so. That's all I have to discuss, Kareem, in this podcast. So, and though this topic is very vast, and we can continue to talk for maybe another day, continuously. But what I want to tell you that we have discussed the key points, the key challenges, and the key framework, and how to navigate it. And we also have discussed the ethical behavior in navigating the political influence on the portfolio success, the organizational political influence in portfolio success. So I want to say thank you, Kareem. Thank you for sharing your very, very rich experience with my community, with P3M community, where you are the ambassador as a PFMP certified, as a PMP certified, and lot of practical experiences I have gained from your own experiences, Kareem. So thank you for that, and I really enjoyed this recording this session with you. Thank
Likewise.
you. Yeah,
Likewise. I think my final takeaway probably would be that organizational politics is inevitable. And I think
absolutely.
the key thing will be always strive to be a strong communicator. And strong communicator means being aware of the different cultural dynamics within the organization where it resides from a jurisdiction level. Also keeping in front of mind as a cornerstone the ethical practices by which you operate as an individual as well as within the organization. And portfolio managers can ultimately be a driving force for alignment and success if they factor in all those different things and just lead from the perspective of a change agent transformation. So offered politics organizational politics is inevitable, but a portfolio manager can leverage the different tools that they have to be very successful. So
I think it's absolutely correct. I don't think so. It was there in the past, and it is there now, and it will always be there in the future. At least I and you cannot see that organizational. You rightly said it's inevitable. We cannot think of an organization without the political influence, isn't the political influence on any portfolio success. So very well said, Kareem. Once again, really enjoyed this podcast with you. Once again, thank you for being my guest. I really learned a lot, and that's all for now, Kareem. And the final thing I want to talk about my community, the P3M podcast community. Please, friends, do share this podcast, do like the podcast, and do tell me if you want to hear about any particular topic or if you want to be guest in my podcast. So please write to me. My contact detail will be there in the podcast description. And I'm really looking forward for coming up with another great topic in this P3M with podcast, P3M podcast with Kailash Upadhyay. So until then, thank you. Keep learning, keep enjoying, and all the best for everything you do. Thank you, Kareem. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
likewise.